Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the GC Show. I hope y'all are doing absolutely amazing. And if you read the title of this video, you might know that this week we're talking about lukewarm Christianity. You see, lukewarm Christianity is a big-time problem with modern Christianity, and specifically modern American Christianity. And it might just be the problem, actually, with Christianity. So this week we are going to dive into it. And you see, lukewarm Christianity is such a big problem that I decided to devote an entire season to that problem. Seeing, that there's people in this world that aren't living out their faith. We need to be living out our faith. We need to be answering the call, right? That's what season 2 is all about. When it comes to lukewarm Christianity, right, you can talk the talk all you want. You can say you're a Christian all you want, but if your actions and the way you live does not back that up, man, what good even is it? What good is it? That's what being a lukewarm Christian is. And I have an example to start this week's episode, kind of like a little story type of example. So picture this, right? You're at, let's just say, a youth group event. It's an outdoor event. You're playing games outside. You're running around getting sweaty. It's like late summer. So, it's pretty hot outside, playing games, getting all sweaty, and you're like, oh man, I need a drink of water. So you go over to the water station. Usually it's just like a table and it's got a bunch of plastic water bottles on there. And you go to get a drink of water and it's warm water. See, I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I drink water and it's that warm water, I want absolutely nothing to do with it, right? a lot of the times you'd rather just go thirsty than drink the warm water because the warm water is no good to you. You see, and Jesus thinks the same way about lukewarm Christianity. In Revelation chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, Jesus says, I know all the things you do, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were one or the other. But since you are like lukewarm water, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Now, the words that Jesus used here toward the end of the verse 16, very important. I will spit you out of my mouth. Whenever you're spitting something out, you want absolutely nothing to do with that thing. Sometimes, go back to the water example, you might awkwardly drink, you'd be like, oh, that's not good. But if you're spitting that water back out, you want absolutely nothing to do with it. And you're just straight up saying that is no good. And you see what Jesus is implying here is that he treats lukewarmness with essentially the same severity as just outright rejection. He's saying that whenever you're being lukewarm, you're essentially just straight up rejecting Jesus. And when you are a lukewarm Christian, your faith is in a dangerous middle zone between rejection and betrayal. You're doing a little bit of both in a way. You're rejecting God because you're withholding a full commitment to Jesus. You're withholding a full relationship. You might go to church on Sundays, you might show up to worship services, things like that, but if you are not devoting your entire life to Christ, if you're going to church, but then, the rest of the day and the rest of the week you're just going out and living the way the world tells you to live, you're withholding a full relationship with Christ. And in that way, you're rejecting God, rejecting Christ in your everyday life if you're just going out and living the way the world tells you to live. Now, next up, you're betraying God because you claim his name but then live for the world, right? Even if you don't intend to, and even if you don't think it's necessarily a problem, when you are lukewarm, you are working against God. You're betraying God because you're basically showing everyone else in this world, hey, I'm a Christian, but Jesus isn't worth giving my entire life to. And you see, the reason why it's important and the reason why lukewarm Christianity is such a problem is because for some people in this world, non-Christians, they don't read the Bible. Christians, we read the Bible. Non-Christians, when they read us, we might be the only Bible that they ever read. That is why it is so important to live like Christ in everything that we do, because if we're just showing others, hey, Jesus isn't worth my entire life, they're not going to want to turn to Christ and say, oh yeah, maybe I should check this thing out, check this whole Jesus thing out. You know what I'm saying? That's why it is so important to devote your entire life to Christ and not be a lukewarm Christian. We have a second verse this week. It comes out of Mark chapter 14. A little context here. Jesus is speaking with his disciples at the Last Supper. And he says in Mark chapter 14, verse 21, he says, "For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Now, Jesus here in this context here at the Last Supper, he's speaking about Judas. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. So what does this have to do with lukewarm Christianity? Well, you see, in a way, being lukewarm is betraying Jesus. But you see, there is a difference here between the two. Right? Jesus is implying with Judas that he has crossed an irreversible line. In that whenever Judas betrays Jesus, there's no turn back. He has crossed an irreversible line. But if you are lukewarm, you have not crossed that irreversible line. But what Jesus is saying is that you are awfully close to crossing that irreversible line. You're in a dangerous spot if you are a lukewarm Christian. And you see, this is something, I might get backlash for saying this, but I feel like it needs to be said, and it's probably been said before. Lukewarm Christians are more dangerous to Christianity than non-Christians. Right? If you have heard the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, but then you're just kind of pushing it off to the side, you say you're a Christian, but then you live the way the world tells you to live and do the things the world tells you to do, how is it going to get people to turn toward Christ? If you're giving 2 hours out of your day, 1 day out of the 7 days of the week, how is that convincing evidence that someone should give their entire life to Christ? And the truth is, it's not. You see, if you had the cure to cancer, wouldn't you want to tell everyone? Tell all your friends, family, and people you love? You see, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is the cure to cancer. And the thing is, in our world, right, there are a lot of Christians that are lukewarm out here, and we don't necessarily need more Christians in this world. We just need Christians to do more. That's the truth. You see, and the reason why people don't want to go to church, non-Christians don't want to go to church, is because of lukewarm Christianity. It's because the people out here that are claiming to be followers of Christ but then live the way the world tells them to live, people aren't going to look at that and want to go to church. You wonder why people say, oh, Christians are hypocrites. They don't live and do what they say. It's because of lukewarm Christianity. It's because we got people out here that say they are Christians. They talk the talk but then don't walk the walk. And if that's you, I'm not saying this in a judgmental sense because I myself at one point in my life was a lukewarm Christian. But I hope that, you would want to make a change and maybe start taking your faith more seriously, because when Jesus was hanging on the cross, he most definitely took that pretty seriously. So I hope this week's episode, if you, find yourself, you're like, dang, Gavin's talking about me. Maybe I'm a lukewarm Christian. I hope this would be a wake-up call to maybe take your faith a little more seriously. So you see, going back to, with Judas betraying Jesus, right? When Judas betrayed Jesus, he crossed the irreversible line, that was his last opportunity. It's over. You see, and we get many opportunities in our life, and we don't know which one will be our last. If you're living in that lukewarm state, you're rejecting and betraying Jesus at the same time. You're living in that dangerous middle zone. Jesus is constantly giving you more opportunities to turn back and give your entire life to him, but you don't know when those opportunities run out. You don't know when that last opportunity is going to be. It's so dangerous to live as a lukewarm Christian, because one day if you die and you're a lukewarm Christian, man, it's not going to look good for you. It really isn't. So I would encourage you most definitely to give your entire life to Christ. And stay tuned, because we got more in the second half. We actually have a straight up demonstration of what lukewarm Christianity looks like. So stay tuned for that. But for now, that will take us to the half. Welcome into halftime, the little news section here on the GC show. Something new I'm still trying out, so you guys have to let me know, Whether you like it or not, whether I should keep it around or not, be sure to let me know down in the comments what you think about that. And, like I said in every episode, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to let me know because I like hearing feedback. I like knowing, what do the fans want to hear when it comes to lessons here in season 2 of the GC show, and really just anything, I like hearing feedback. I want to make the best product possible. And as always, like I said the last 2 weeks, if you have any prayer requests, something that's just weighing heavy on your heart, I'd encourage you to reach out, whether that's leaving it down below in the comments, messaging me through Instagram, or if you know me personally, messaging me personally, or really just reaching out to anyone that would be willing to pray for you, because I think sometimes we underestimate the power of prayer, and the power of prayer is so strong. So if you have any prayer requests, I would encourage you to reach out in some way, shape, or form. If you know of anyone who may need to hear this lesson or any of the other ones, I'd encourage you to share it with them, because the goal of the GC show is to point even just one more person toward Christ and bring them all to heaven, the BATH acronym. So other than that, I don't really have a whole lot of other news. We got Live and Lifted next week. Stay tuned for that. First chance where GC Show Nation can come together as a community and grow in our faith. I'm so pumped for that, and I cannot wait. So stay tuned for that next week. But for now, let's take it to the second half. Welcome back into the second half. And for those of you guys who are listening on Spotify, you probably have no idea that right now I'm currently standing in my driveway. I'm not in the chair. I'm standing next to 2 ladders here. This is the ladder demonstration when it comes to lukewarm Christianity, just kind of a visual demonstration of what it looks like to be a lukewarm Christian. So you see, on one side you have living for Christ, and on the other side you have living for the world. And you might say, well, Gavin, some weeks I go to church, living for Christ, but then the other 6 out of the 7 days of the week, you do what the world tells you to do. You're living for the world. You might say, well, Gavin, I show up to worship services, but then I listen to secular music when I'm in my car by myself. And the truth is, as a Christian, we can't be here in this middle spot as a lukewarm Christian and expect to be fully on fire for God, because the truth is, Jesus is either Lord of all or he isn't Lord at all. You see, he tells us to deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow after him daily. So if we have anything to do with the world, how can we be fully on Team Jesus? And the truth is, you can die here in the middle too, and that's the same thing as choosing the world altogether. So the truth is, don't be stuck here in the middle, don't be a lukewarm Christian, and be all in for Christ and live the life that he called you to live. Welcome back to the chair here in the second half. I hope you enjoyed that little ladder demonstration, and it gave you maybe a visual showing like, hey, you can't be here in the middle. You got to choose one side or the other. You can't have one foot in and one foot out. You got to be all in for Christ. Now, this example I want to give as we jump back in here, I call it the military example. You see, because getting saved is kind of like joining the military in a way. Getting saved is the bare minimum. It's like enrolling into the military during a war. Once you're in, you have to fight to survive. Just because you enlisted in the war does not mean that you won the war. I like to think of this example as the first one that came to mind. It's a very modern example. The Russia and Ukraine war. Think about if those people in Ukraine, whenever, we're going to war. Think about if the people in Ukraine, whenever they enlisted into the military, they had a huge celebration because yeah, we're in the war, we won. Think about how dumb that sounds, Just because you have joined the war does not mean you won. You have to fight to survive. You have to fight. And it's the same thing with being lukewarm. You have many people out here going to church, saying they're Christians and thinking, yeah, we did it, That's all we got to do, we made it. But the truth is, once you give your life to Christ, that's when the war starts. That is when the war starts. It would be so silly for someone to enlist into the military and celebrate thinking they won the war because they're in the military. That's the same thing with being lukewarm. Think about how silly that sounds. Being a Christian means that you are called to fight on the front lines until you are called home to heaven. Because the truth is, you're on the front lines over here, and on the other side of the front lines is the world and Satan. And Satan is trying to do everything he can to tear you apart, knock you down, steal, kill, and destroy. He's trying to do everything he can to rob you and turn you away from Christ. So you can never let your guard down, because if you're lukewarm, that's kind of just sitting off to the side and saying, oh yeah, Satan, go ahead and do your thing. No, you have to be on guard, and you can never let your guard down, because Satan is always trying to attack you. And you are always in this fight until you are called home, until the day whenever your duty is complete here on earth and you are called home to heaven. That is the fight that you're in against Satan every day. And being a lukewarm Christian, man, I would not recommend it. And if that's you, if you're a lukewarm Christian, I hope this episode would get you to hopefully turn a little bit and maybe take your faith a little more seriously, because when Jesus was up there on the cross, he most definitely took that pretty seriously. So I would encourage you to take your faith a little more seriously. If you're listening to this episode and you're like, dang, dude, he's talking about me. If you're saying dude, I might be a lukewarm Christian out here, I hope that this episode wouldn't be judgmental, because that's not what it's about. Because I myself was judgmental, or not judgmental, I myself was a lukewarm Christian at one point in my life. I would say in my middle school years, I was a very lukewarm Christian. But, I realized at one point, I was like, dude, I got to be all in or all out. So I hope that this episode this week is that same thing for you, that it's maybe a wake-up call saying dude, I need to get into the fight. And not just be out there in the stands, but actually get into the game. You see, so the main point for this week's episode, I'm going to keep doing these main points, man, because I like them. If we're talking air temperature, lukewarm as an air temperature is a very comfortable beach vacation, right? But Jesus didn't call us to be comfortable. Instead, he called us to be much warmer than that. He called us to be on fire for him. And that is the lesson for today. So like I said a little bit ago, man, I hope this week's episode is a wake-up call for you. If you're hearing this and thinking dude, I might be a lukewarm Christian, I hope it's a wake-up call. So stay tuned next week. First ever live and lifted here on the GC show. But for now, thank you guys for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Be great today, and praise God.